Welcome to the East Asia by Rhoads Murphey chapter summary podcast at the Historian's Eye. Please subscribe, and if you'd like to be notified when new episodes appear, click the bell icon. Chapter 2, Prehistory, Beginnings in China and the Shang Dynasty. Section 1 deals primarily with the Paleolithic era and the Neolithic Revolution. Section 2, Agricultural Origins of Southeast Asia. There is a lack of any concrete archaeological evidence in Southeast Asia. The hot, humid environment resulted in a rapid decay of material evidence. It is likely that rice originated in Southeast Asia, where it first grew as a wild swamp plant. Root crops and millet were most likely the first plants farmed in the upland areas and river valleys. It is around 1000 BCE that irrigation and flood management were developed, making rice the dominant crop, and the lower river valleys and deltas the major agricultural areas. There is evidence of early agricultural settlements in what is now northern Vietnam and southern China. Rice agriculture may actually be as old in parts of South China as in parts of Southeast Asia. With these early agricultural settlements comes the first evidence of domesticated animals, including pigs, chickens, and later buffalo. These societies were most likely matriarchal, women providing the majority of farm labor and development, while men hunted and gathered. This most likely changed when warfare became common, although most of Southeast Asia remains matriarchal. Peoples and early kingdoms of Southeast Asia. The majority of modern people in Southeast Asia originally came from what is today China, perhaps Tibet, with minor and later additions from India. Migrations most likely occurred during the Neolithic period, and people most likely interbred with earlier inhabitants. There may also have been earlier migrations from Southeast Asia northward into South China, which is in many ways more culturally and environmentally similar to Southeast Asia than it is to North China. South and North China were not united as a state until 221 CE. It is the relationship between South China and Southeast Asia that created Chinese agriculture. Northern Vietnam shares more similarities with Southeast China. Both are a part of an early kingdom. Easy access between the two by river and through a low mountain range contributed to there being little distinction between the two populations culturally or physically until the 3rd century CE. Prehistoric China. The earliest well-documented civilizations in China are in the north. This does not mean that the north was more developed than the south. South China simply has more of the same problems that occurred archaeologically in Southeast Asia. The climate does not allow for the preservation of materials, nor has the area been as heavily investigated. While the climate in North China is colder and drier than in the south, it has highly fertile loess soil and clear land. Cultures in North China were most likely producing pottery as early as or earlier than in Southeast Asia. Pottery remains suggests an agricultural surplus and that they were used for storage. The first and most important crop in North China was millet. This suggests an independent development of agricultural societies in the north that differed from the south, which was influenced by Southeast Asia. Banpo. Banpo was an important site excavated near modern Shan in northern China. It was a thriving village by at least 4000 BCE. Its inhabitants grew millet and domesticated sheep, goats, and pigs. Rice and water buffalo, so important to agricultural development in the south, are absent until about 1500 BCE. Like other early settlements in the north, Banpo was located in the upland away from the floodplain of the Yellow River. Settlements began moving slowly into the river valleys by 2000 BCE with the development of some forms of irrigation. By 1000 BCE, wheat had replaced millet as the main crop, and the production of barley and rice were adopted as supplemental crops, increasing the number of settlements in the river valley. Wheat and barley were most likely adopted from southwest China, again suggesting a different trajectory from the settlements in the south. Painted pottery cultures. The name Yangshao comes from the location of its discovery in Henan province. Production methods included kiln firing, but did not include wheel throwing. Tools were made from stone or from bones. The pottery was intricately decorated with red and black geometric designs. An early form was practiced at Banpo, and the production of this type of pottery seems to continue in China until 1500 BCE. Longshan, or black pottery. Black pottery was discovered in Shandong province. This pottery was produced using a wheel and was fired in a kiln. The tools for this pottery were also made of stone and bone, and the pottery was also intricately designed. Neither of these pottery types reveals a connection with earlier pottery from Mesopotamia or India. Some scholars suggest that writing began with symbols on pottery around 4000 BCE, and these symbols are the basis of both classical and modern Chinese. A more fully developed writing system emerged in 2500 BCE, perhaps even earlier. It is most likely that despite a lack of pottery production, similar systems of writing began earlier in South China and in northern Vietnam. The origins of China. It is impossible to locate an exact date in which a city-based, literate, metal-using civilization emerged in China. This transition happened over a long period of time in different isolated communities. By about 2000 BCE, the Longshan culture had begun building settlements larger than a typical village. The Shang Dynasty was established 4 centuries later in 1600 BCE in the same area around the Yellow River in the North China Plain, most likely as a consolidation of Yangshao and Longshan communities. However, it is possible that such a merging occurred much earlier, possibly to form the dynasty of Xia. This is confirmed by traditional Chinese texts, but not confirmed by archaeologists. It is important to note that the Shang Dynasty was discounted by historians until the 1920s, when archaeological evidence revealed it to have existed. Despite the historical questions concerning Xia, it is evident that many of the elements of a distinct Chinese culture are present in the Shang Dynasty. China benefited from the developments to the west in Mesopotamia and India, like wheat, donkeys, alfalfa, grapes, and some elements of mathematics. However, much more came from the south, including rice and methods of cultivation. Recent archaeological evidence has shown that there was a series of independent cultures both in the north and south from around 5000 BCE that was wholly unrelated to Longshan or Shang. It appears there is no clear center of what would become the Chinese civilization. China had multiple cultural origins, which came together only with the Qin conquest in 221 BCE. The emergence of the Shang culture. Millet was the main crop, and its cultivation was dominant throughout North China. The Shang developed independently from Mesopotamia and India after adopting agricultural development from the south. Shang bronze craftsmanship is without peer for this period, and it appears to owe nothing to other civilizations. The exact extent of the Shang political realm is unknown, yet it appears to be limited to the central Yellow River floodplain. Vassals were claimed to the west, east, and northeast, and possibly to the south. Millet, wheat, and some rice were cultivated. Hunting provided a supplemental source of food in addition to domesticated cattle, pigs, and poultry. Slaves, who were primarily war prisoners, may have provided an important source of agricultural labor and were possibly used for building and as troops. There is also evidence of a conscious effort to separate the living and the dead. In the city of Anyang, tombs were built separate from the rest of the city. Monumental buildings developed during this time, including at the city of Anyang, which has many impressive royal tombs. Bronze casting is an important element in the development of the Shang society. Use of bronze was reserved for ritual and war, or in other words, metal for nobles, shamans, and kings. Piece molding techniques were used for production, and those techniques are very sophisticated and labor-intensive. Divination and oracle bones. The oracle bones reveal evidence of a written language despite the absence of written text. Questions were inscribed onto pieces of cattle bone or tortoise shells. Shamans made offerings to ancestors and spirits. In return, the divine spirits would answer yes or no questions inscribed onto the bones. Some inscriptions provide lists of Shang kings and brief accounts of royal activities. Divination and oracle bones reveal the important role of ancestors and the general organization of government. Deceased royal ancestors demanded respect from the living. It also appears that the Shang Dynasty was a hereditary aristocratic society plagued by war. Toward the end of the period, bronze vessels were also inscribed. The Zhou Dynasty. Shang resources became strained by internal and external threats as well as extravagant royal building and display. The dynasty ended with a slave revolt abetted by one of the vassals, the Zhou, who had guarded the western frontier. The Zhou were a neighboring group previously taken over by the Shang, who by the time they took power had adopted most of Shang culture. Therefore, the change in dynasty simply led to the continuation of development in culture and technology originally begun by the Shang. The Mandate of Heaven. The Zhou had given their own account of the excesses and oppressions of Shang rule, and voiced what has become known as the standard justification for dynastic change in China. Quote, "The iniquity of the Shang is full. Heaven commands me to destroy it." End quote. In other words, the Shang had lost their mandate from heaven to rule by mismanaging the government. In late Shang culture, most tools were of stone or wood. Money was primarily cowrie shells. The capital Anyang was discovered in 1927, after oracle bones used in medicine were tracked back to the site.